Okay, we did it. We're back. 1 minute. Welcome for everybody online. We are going to go through a panel that we have cleverly called "We Hear You Cloud and Clear." I'm very proud of myself for the, the titling. But today we are joined by three panelists that will be introducing themselves in a moment. The things that I would ask of you online and those in the room. We are going to have discussions from three different people that will be an asset owner and operator perspective from an industrial control system in the cloud, and a cloud service provider perspective from a organization who's doing quite a bit of work from different industry and sectors across the globe, and then from a regulatory perspective. So someone who has to go out and say, this is what you're supposed to be doing, and encountering different organizations who are doing things in the cloud, and they have to figure out what does that mean from the perspective of how are they satisfying what's required. We'll also have the perspective of all of you as attendees. The different things that I would ask during this next 45 minutes, 50 minutes that we talk as a panel. Number one, the left and right limits. So I think many of us working in industrial control systems and working in environments around the world would immediately have this gut reaction when you hear control from the cloud, or you're going to do industrial control systems from the cloud. Borderline throw up in your mouth, kind of a no, don't do it. We're not going to pursue that. But I would tell you, there's a number of different environments that you'll encounter that are on the left side of this, meaning it's absolutely never, ever going to happen currently. Meaning if you're looking at weapon systems or a nuclear environment or some very, very high value targets, you would say highly unlikely they're going to be leading the way on innovation and pursuing industrial control system cloud control and cloud integration. On the right side of that, you have organizations specifically in renewables or offshore wind, or you have unique conditions that are happening in places like Ukraine, where environments where on-prem systems and servers are currently unavailable. So being able to do some things in planning and analytics from the cloud provide features that they can't have otherwise. So you have things that are on the not going to happen anytime soon. You have things that are on the it's already happening and it's the best way they could do it. And then you have a whole bunch of things in the middle. So we're going to try to talk about the whole bunch of things in the middle, because they are going to start pursuing forward, and we need to start shaping how they're doing it instead of trying to fix it years later. That's the left and the right. Within those things in the middle, start thinking about what that might be. In some cases, it's going to be information in the cloud, data at rest, data in use, data in transit. In some cases, it's going to be applications, looking at the environment and trying to figure out how do we plan our resources ahead of time? How do we do billing and after the fact analysis and optimization? And then there's going to be the discussions on absolute control, so real time control from cloud. So even those things that are in the middle of the left-right limits have different degrees of data, applications, and control. Last, if there's any unique operational concerns that you're struggling with of how would we achieve this, how would we possibly ever move in this direction, we would like you to think about those for the discussion of the panel. And then what prioritization do you see pursuits? Are you getting pushed hard from third parties, vendors, that they're moving all the solutions that you currently use to the cloud and you have to go with them? So what does that mean for you? Are you currently looking at new projects that you're looking to adopt cloud and it's the first time you're heading into that space? So the priority of what you would like to hear from the panel, and in some cases, we may not have the answer amongst all of us, but we're certainly seeing this as a emerging issue that needs to be addressed. It cannot be ignored. It's happening whether we like it or not. And again, I think the whether you like it or not approach is on the left and the right of this. There's some places that you will be on the left side that you don't like it, but I would consider all the things that are in the middle and all the things that are over to the right that are actually gaining cybersecurity capabilities and benefits by pursuing solutions in the cloud. That is what I wanted to cover to start. I will ask you to submit any questions to Slack. I will be working through those as we go. But from there, we are going to start with Mr. Stephen Holtzclaw. He is with, he's the Senior Vice President, Shared Services at Enchanted Rock, which is a microgrid solutions company. I'm going to largely leave it to him to introduce himself, talk about his company and what they do, so that you can better understand why ICS in the cloud is beneficial to them. So Stephen.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks for the great intro. So many of you probably haven't heard of Enchanted Rock, or hopefully you have. We started off in 2006 as a kind of small boutique microgrid operating company. And we've over the years developed a proprietary technology that's based around a renewable natural gas and also natural gas in different area and markets. And that dual purpose microgrid is something that we deploy. Some of our big customers are Walmart, HEB, Microsoft actually in a data center in California is relying on us to provide them resiliency and power generation, as well as be able to participate in the markets in those areas. So we have just shy of about 500 megawatts worth of generation in the state of Texas, and we do participate in the ERCOT market. And as Tim mentioned, I'm the Senior Vice President of Shared Services. So anything with a blinking light on it pretty much reports to me. So IT, OT, cybersecurity, as well as our software development group all kind of roll up. And here to talk to you a little bit about what our journey looks like currently as we're building our next generation microgrid control platform in the cloud. Right now, our primary control platform is handled in our own data centers. That was the easiest way to keep direct line of sight on it, is to say, okay, this server's mine and I know where it is. So now it's a further progression when we want to start taking a look at machine learning, algorithms, enhanced telemetry, and those types of things.
Awesome. Next is Christine Martz, the industry specialist energy and utilities for Amazon Web Services. However, 12 years prior working in the energy and utility sector, we won't say where, a large North American utility within their security organization, involved in a number of different compliance and technical cybersecurity solutions. If you would like to talk a little bit about what you're doing for your Amazon Web Service organization.
Sure, thanks. So my name is Christine Martz. I work for Amazon Web Services. I work within our security assurance department, which is a division of AWS security. So I lead our US energy and utilities program, which means I engage with regulators, customers, partners on security and compliance issues that are specific to the energy and utility sector. That being said, security assurance is made up of leaders such as myself who focus on different critical infrastructure sectors. So I have peers across telco, financial services, government, so like the federal programs, all sorts of critical infrastructure sectors, which kind of makes us, puts us in a bit of a unique position because we have the ability to work across teams to understand the maturity of cloud adoption within those spaces, the security challenges that they've experienced, and share that amongst each other so that we can help accelerate cloud adoption within our own segments. We can help our customers learn from those other segments. So that is something that I really appreciate about working at Amazon, and I hope I can share some of that information with you today. The other thing that I would say is that in the work that I do over the last 2.5 years or so with Amazon, what I've seen is that regulators are starting to take an interest and support the industry's exploration of the use of cloud for operational technology use cases, as long as security and reliability are kept in mind, right? So there is that regulator support with the caveat that, of course, security and compliance and security and reliability come first. And that, I think, is really foundational to the conversation. The fact that this sector is very collaborative in the way that they set those security and compliance requirements is a big advantage that you guys have over some of the other critical infrastructure sectors. So I'll leave it with that, and we'll follow up from there. And it's a perfect handoff for our next panel.
Thank you for joining us. Last, Kenneth Carver, local Texas Director of Compliance Assessments for the Texas Reliability Entity. For those of you not familiar with NERC, once there was 8 regions. Now there are 6 regions, and one of those regions is specific to just Texas because it's Texas. The other 5 regions have footprints that cover multi-state. Texas Reliability Entity is Texas specific. There are electrical reasons for that. It's not just silliness because of Texas, but a vast number of electric utilities within this one state. Kenneth has worked for a TRE for over 11 years as a SIP auditor, compliance team lead, cybersecurity outreach, and director of assessments, working with operations and cybersecurity teams at utilities across the Texas footprint.
I guess you already knew I was a regulator, right? I was online as well. I'll clarify a couple of things. So where is my domain, right? So the DHS, they have these 16 critical infrastructures, right? So I live in the energy sector there, but energy is divided up by oil and gas and electricity. So I live in electricity, but electricity includes a big component. Everything is what we call the bulk power system. And then a subset of that, there's certain criteria that needs to be met, is also known as the bulk electric system, right? So it's the most impactful stuff, if you will, if I could kind of boil it down. So that's where I live. And so the Federal Power Act basically mandates us to audit and enforce the critical infrastructure protection, the CIP, which includes cyber and physical security standards on behalf of the federal government. But I'm also responsible for the operations and planning side. So we're talking about, if I could boil that down, electrical engineering type of standards and requirements. So that's the group that I lead, for reliability and security. Thanks for allowing me to be here. And I already got one comment on my suit, so maybe next time I won't wear a tie.
Yes, we have a great panel. Just as a backstory, as the electric sector, prior to having regulatory mandatory requirements, was generally a self-governed environment. So long ago, when there was a large power system blackout that happened, the utility entities kind of rose up and said, no matter what we're doing to secure and defend our environment, maintain it and operate it for reliability, if our neighbor fails, we fail. And that's why you see when storms come in, electric utilities send all their line workers, send everybody out for mutual aid, and they do everything they can to help. So it's a very interesting industry where we are all trying to rise all tides, rise all ships. So long ago, the sector saw cyber attacks coming in and impacting industrial control system environments, and they said, we should have cybersecurity standards to do better. So a standards authorization request was made, and they began developing requirements in this space. As we look now across a group of different regional entities, cloud service providers, and asset owners and operators have stood up, gathered together and said, we need to start doing something to address industrial control systems in the cloud, and specifically what that will mean when it's attempted to be regulated. So organizations like Amazon would say, the standards aren't going to come out and specifically say, use this solution. So we have to make sure that what is being provided works across multiple cloud service providers. So they work with other partners, entities and asset owners, people that will be audited, work together. So this group of people that are here are part of that voluntary weekly call where we're just trying to do something better for the industry. So at that alone, I would say, thank you very much for being involved in that. It's something that we want to shape. We don't want to wait to have the rules come down and then fight it, like what you've seen with the transportation and kind of pipeline rules that have started, and then mass battles had to happen to get them into an appropriate space. We're trying to shape them from asset owners for asset owners. This group of people is helping do that. We will start with a couple of questions here, and then we will move into any questions from the audience and those online. So I hope we have a good understanding of why this panel exists, but a question for everyone, I'm going to ask anyway. Why do we need to get this right? Or if you simply state that a different way, why is this so important? Of the two issues that I had the opportunity to choose to bring to this summit, one is more on the ICS pen testing and assessment. So how do we find problems before they're found for us? And the next topic that I wanted to discuss was specifically industrial control systems in the cloud, as I see that happening elsewhere in the world, and I see it happening across a number of sectors here. But from your perspectives, and if we could start with the asset owner and then move to cloud service, and Kenneth, I promise you will start the next question. So if you start,
I'll wait patiently.
why is it so important and why do we need to get it right, Stephen?
Well, for us, our primary focus is always resiliency for our customers. So as we look at trying to make sure that we have these assets that we're going to start managing and maintaining from a cloud control platform, something that isn't exactly directly in our house, it's paramount for us that we protect that asset, protect our customers that are utilizing those assets for either, life safety purposes, or even in the case of a grocery store to, maintain power, so they're not having to worry about spending $3 million to replace the perishable goods that are in that facility when the power goes out. And then also to be good neighbors to everybody else that participates in the grid. And obviously, as we grow in size, we have the ability to manipulate or change frequency on the electrical lines, things along those lines that could be catastrophic if we're utilized in the wrong way. So for us, it's about one, understanding that we have to grow and develop and build and be able to expand and have market share and understand how our markets are going to change and conditions and all those things. But at the same time, we have to look at everything from a risk-focused approach. And we have to make sure that whatever we're adopting, we're good stewards to everything else.
Great. Same question.
Yeah, I would echo some of what you said and say, really, reliability is table stakes for the sector, right? Like that is really the goal of getting this right. That is truly getting this right. And when it comes to defining what a new security framework should look like, or what security framework should apply to ICS in the cloud, really what you're ultimately trying to do is maintain reliability. With the expansion of renewable energy and the energy transition that's going on right now, there's a lot more data out there that needs to be analyzed. So if you look at it from the renewable providers that are trying to grow their footprint, they need to understand the generation at each individual site. They need to be able to understand load forecasting and predictive maintenance to keep those sites operational and running, and supporting the grid when demand goes up, you know?
Sure.
And from an ISO perspective, if you think about it from grid operators, they are having to now aggregate far more information about those increasing renewable energy sites to be able to make sure that they are balancing the grid in a way that supports that demand. And so from an AWS perspective, we see a large opportunity for cloud to come in and help with those storage and compute needs that are really starting to increase as part of the energy transition.
I'll take a different route, maybe a scarier route. So, for those that aren't aware of CISA, right, we're in a shields up environment right now, and it's been up for a while. So much so, even the Biden administration released the National Cybersecurity Strategy back in March of 2023. So there's 5 pillars in that document, and they're all around defending critical infrastructure and doing what's right for the greater good, building things with security in mind and resiliency, and making our critical infrastructure safer from a cyber perspective. And that's what we need to do, because there's foreign nation states right now performing reconnaissance, trying to get in some cases, what Tim showed earlier, have gotten in and compromised us. And so if a foreign nation state is going to do us some damage, it's their target's going to be critical infrastructure, period. So if that doesn't scare you enough, that's why we have to do these things. And when we talk about in context of cloud, right now where our borders are moving more and more away from our traditional data centers, our control centers, our generation facilities, our transmission facilities, and we're moving now further and further out into the World Wide Web, the Internet of Things, right? Some of you have heard of distributed energy resources and inverter-based resources, and the things that connect out there, your refrigerators that connect to the internet, all that stuff like that, right? So the borders are expanding, and then the demand for resiliency and security will be there. Otherwise, those are all attack vectors.
Let me ask this as the inverse of the question. What does this look like when it's done wrong? Either from organizations that you're encountering where it creates problems in how they've implemented, or from a operations perspective, different approaches that you could pursue that might make things easier, but from a cybersecurity, and then from a cloud service provider, what challenges have you had with different sectors or asset owners that, as you ask them to implement certain ways or pursue different models, where have you seen poor implementations that drive concerns?
Well, I plead the fifth on that one. However, we could sit up here all day and talk about cybersecurity and controls, but it really comes down to risk and money, which all of you have to deal with on your day-to-day lives with all the different jobs that you work. So what it's about is basically, it's kind of the fundamentals, right? Business impact analysis, finding out what's the high risk stuff, and then putting controls or utilizing existing controls to reduce the risk. The risk is always going to be there, right? So what does a poor implementation look like? From a regulatory perspective, that means fines, monetary fines. What it also means is loss to real-time operations at the end of the day. And at the worst extreme case is death. Right? So that's what we're talking about here. So a blackout, right? We talk Uri, that sort of stuff. There was a loss of life. And I know that's a natural disaster perspective, but the same can be true about the cyber physical security side of things.
Of course. Any comments from you?
Yeah.
You can plead the fifth as well.
I just considered it.
Considered it.
But to be perfectly honest, I mean, you kind of go back and take a look at everything that is being said here. I've had several really good conversations with Kenneth about this specifically, is because it's a scary thought to be in a complete loss of control state. For us especially, I mean, you think about it, it really does factor into loss of life, loss of market revenue, brand reputation damage, anything that you can think of that falls in those risk categories. And that's the reason why we try to focus everything that we do on a risk management framework, and we have a full understanding of what we're going into, and we're working on it. And what I can say that is just nice about this market or this community is that we've all kind of banded together and at least have a forum to be able to talk about it. So every single person that participates in the electrical industry and the electrical markets all have this same level of risk that they're having to see. And the worst thing that I could ever imagine is one of my fellow partners having something that's directly exposed on the internet, that because somebody had to work from home and we have a problem that stems from it. Our biggest risk that we look at are outside threat actors, but at the same point in time, it's the individuals that work in those sites that are also going to be your other thing that you have to keep in mind. And then on top of all of it, you actually brought up a really good point earlier, is it's about a leadership focus and making sure that that level of risk is communicated all the way up to the people that are making those decisions, to make sure that you have buy-in to be able to drive down and actually make real change in your environments.
Yeah. Do you have?
I was gonna say, from a cloud security perspective, a cloud risk perspective, I would say one of the biggest risks that I personally see is when entities or utilities would ask questions or perhaps not go through a proper training channel, right? So it's a big change. Change management is a huge deal when you're talking about implementing a new technology, especially one that has the variety of service features that a cloud service provider can offer, right? Like we offer a number of options because we support a number of critical infrastructure sectors, and we also provide very thorough training and materials to help support customers in understanding what they're implementing and how to implement the proper security controls. But if no one's paying attention, it's not it wouldn't be implemented appropriately. And so that's the worst case scenario I can think of, is not pushing down that training from the top and the leadership to make sure that people understand that change management.
That is a large concern, I think, from a perspective of folks working in industrial control system space. One of the greatest concerns is just not being prepared for this. So it ended up being, and will end up being, a surprise on your organization, on your process, even if it's just for information in the cloud. And then as an audit appears and you're being asked, how are you controlling access? How are you reviewing those accesses? How are you removing access to the information? And then you're surprised that you should have been doing a different type of key management with your cloud service provider than you were. And in actuality, you were doing shared key and they had the capability to grant access or view information, and you have no idea who has access to it, who was removed on time, and then you have a surprise in an audit. That would be the best case scenario with fines. The worst case is, I can recall when we went to another innovation many, many years ago when we went full virtualized in our energy management system. Prior to that, when something bad would happen to the operators, they would tell us, and we would all descend in mass into the data center and flip open keyboards and start rebooting systems and failing over systems and doing everything we could possibly do. And then leadership would come from corporate down and start wondering, is our industrial customers being aware, and how long is this going to be down? And we had information and answers and everything on the ready. Everyone in the data center working side by side, shoulder by shoulder, 10, 12 people. Then we went full virtual. And then we had an issue where our storage area network lost all of its LUNs and it had no idea what anything was, and we couldn't boot anything. And we descend in the data center and realize we have nothing to touch. We can't type on anything. We can't do anything. And we're wondering, how we haven't done this before. And now you have 8, 9 people, like, what do we do? And so as you look at those technologies and that innovation that you work through a capital project and there's a team on it, And then there's a whole bunch of people that are on the operate maintain that haven't been appropriately trained and they're not ready. We're about to start marching into that again across kind of these cloud environments, and not just for information where you'll get a fine and you'll learn and things are bad, but they're not horrible. You'll get into an issue where you can't control your control system because you're not prepared, you're not trained, and you haven't worked through the entire architecture of failure. What happens when an undeterministic communication system goes down? How does your process continue to operate without it? Those are all things from a training perspective that are absolutely key. I think Christine highlighted very, very well that there's a need for all of us to start thinking about, regardless of what your daily job is, from network monitoring, OT support, process, cloud is going to be some part of what you need to touch, even if it's just information, even if it's applications and optimization, but even more importantly, if it's control. I would ask Christine, what sectors or environments do you see as the early adopters? So from a cloud service provider, you have visibility to international footprint, multiple sectors, and various OEMs that are coming and saying, we manufacture gear and software applications and we want to start moving to cloud. So what are the early adopters that you're seeing? And then what are the sectors that are kind of a never adopter that are really, really not pursuing or pushing?
Yeah, I mean, I probably won't refer to them as never adopters because I'm an optimist and a glass half full person. I will say that we have a lot of people saying that they'll be first to be second, and that's okay in my book.
Nice. Silver medalists.
But as far as early adopters go, if we're looking globally across all critical infrastructure sectors, I think we can all look to financial services as a good example of a sector where there is a considerable amount of cloud maturity. And they do have to be able to process millions of transactions flawlessly within a certain period of time. Their operations are also considered very critical, even though perhaps they are not as clearly defined as life and safety as the electric sector. As you move into talking about the electric sector and where we're seeing the most innovation, the most questions about what people can do in the cloud, it's going to be from those same people that we talked about earlier, renewable energy providers who are looking to grow out their footprint because there are really aggressive sustainability, decarbonization goals out there. There's a lot of investment in renewable energy right now. I think there's a projection out there that says that by 2050, 44% of electric generation in the US is going to be renewables. So that's where we're seeing a lot of questions about how can I use cloud to help support my operations and my business objectives. And so those are really critical use cases. And then because of that renewable build out, we're also seeing the ISOs starting to ask a lot of questions about, well, then how do I balance that generation? How do I understand what to expect from demand? How do I do more simulations more quickly to help me make decisions? So those are kind of the early adopters. Where we're seeing less interest is where we're starting to talk about entities who are primarily focused on medium and high impact use cases under the NERC CIP standard. So things that are directly control for those medium and high impact use cases. But we're still starting to get some questions about that to the point of the SAR, right? So we engage with an industry group that developed a SAR that's related to cloud technology. It was submitted by industry, and we expect it to go through the NERC process in the next couple of months for review and approval. But that's really asking questions about all the way up through control, but it's mostly focused on the needs today, which are things like security event monitoring solutions, physical access control systems, things that would benefit from increased compute and storage capabilities, but don't necessarily have that 15-minute impact on the grid.
Sure.
And especially in places where we're starting to see entities adopt cloud-based versions of their security event monitoring tool for their corporate side, they're starting to ask questions about, well, why can't I have one solution instead of having a separated solution in my regulated environment? How can I decrease costs? How can I get better visibility into my my cyber threats based using that same tool? So that's where we're seeing a lot of change. And then for utilities that are not asking necessarily what they're not necessarily pushing for real live operational control use cases, but they are investing in research related to them. It's when it's driven from the executive level at the top and it's been pushed down from the IT perspective is now moving into OT.
Sure. So. For those, ISO, independent system operator.
Yes,
That's
you're grid
one.
operator. Sorry.
Large scale grid operators where multiple electric utilities are members, they share data real time, and they handle the market side, the electric system market operation, as well as the reliability, in some cases balancing and dispatch, depending on the role of the ISO.
Thank you.
There was one other acronym that made perfect sense to me, but
I'm
I was-
guilty of acronyms.
I was concerned.
Please stop me.
SAR, Standards Authorization
Authorization
Request.
request. It's
Go
the beginning of the standards development process. So if you want to propose the creation of a new standard under the NERC CIP standards or the revisions to existing standards, you would kick that off via a standard authorization request, a SAR, and it goes through the NERC rule of procedure process for standards development. So it'll go to the standards committee and then move on to soliciting drafting team members.
And that's very important from the perspective of when virtualization technologies came out, many entities found ways to implement them under the existing rules and regulations. And many auditors and regulators found ways to audit and assess them under the existing rules and regulations. Cloud solutions become very difficult to do under the existing rules and regulations because of a number of different access control and physical security requirements. As you look at cloud architecture, it becomes hard. So a new standard for specific requirements for this to happen is what is being referenced with a number of customers coming to cloud service provider and working together as a users group to go and require those changes. Whereas in other parts of the world, they don't have those existing requirements, so they're able to pursue forward.
Oh, that's true. And I should have added that we are seeing growth and expansion in the energy sector, specifically in other geos. So in Australia specifically, we have some use cases where they are using cloud technology for some more operational use cases. We also have some in Europe. So in where the NIS directive applies, there's some questions about how they can use operational technology. There's also this interesting juxtaposition of renewable energy companies that are headquartered internationally and building out renewable energy in North America, and then how the regulations in each of those geos are influencing how they're building out those solutions.
Yep.
So there's a lot going on, lots of questions about regulations.
This is certainly an area where we are beginning to fall behind in our capabilities to innovate, use, and pursue. And there's this concept that regulation and standards are a blockade. Stephen, from a perspective of an asset owner, practitioner, implementer, what security benefits do you see from the perspective of cloud integration for operational environments?
So I think Christine kind of started off really well with mentioning earlier about all of the tools that are afforded to you by adopting a cloud platform. So that for us, that was one of the first things we took a look at was the increase in information and telemetry that we'd be able to have on all of the systems that run inside of a cloud environment. So that's one piece of it, but then every other part that you'd actually have available to you, every other component, microsegmentation or zero trust, the ability to monitor integration pipelines. So you understand as the code, as it moves from your development group through your actual production systems. And then once it's updated and maintained along the way, and in real time, being able to understand if there's threats that are being injected through a threat actor that's in the environment, things along those lines that you wouldn't be able to do with traditional deployment methodologies or technologies. Some of the other areas where we see a really large benefit is if we start working with cloud companies that are FedRAMP certified, there's already at least some of the physical security requirements, things that we would need to find as we continue to mature through the NERC CIP process. I mean, obviously we're in the process of becoming low, so that would be one of our first areas, but we want to understand that. And then a lot of the additional technologies that layer on top for the underlying connectivity between different endpoints and the telemetry that we can gather and the IOCs, we get a lot higher fidelity of knowing what's going on in the environment without having a huge capital investment of saying, okay, I've got to go buy firewalls for every single part of this here, install this software and have an IDS sensor that's going to send telemetry to Dragos and all these other parts and pieces, when realistically that's baked into the solution. It's a matter of you turning it on, gathering that telemetry, and then being able to threat hunt and understand what's in the environment as you build it out. So for us, it's opening a box and looking in and saying, wow, this is all the toys that we've been wanting for a very long time. And now we have very easy access to them where we can bolt it in place and really actually take full charge of what we're putting in the environment. That for us is what's exciting. Being able to do that and then also layer on the ability to be elastic. So dev guys are the ones that are right now in there building this platform. So we're not buying a piece of software, we're actually developing this from scratch for us. And being able to iterate and go through processes, and then even be able to take our security teams and have them integrate and take a look at what's going on inside that development process, allows us to really work towards that secure by design methodology that we have and mitigate the risk of what this solution is when it's finalized. And you get to see all the subcomponents and the microservices and the code and how they interact with each other. So you have a very clear picture and understanding of what that control platform looks like and what's normal. So then once you have a baseline, then you understand additionally how to protect it. But it does require understanding what tools are there, how to use them, and training your folks to use them the right way.
Can you talk a little, just a little bit about the training side as you're seeing this train coming? And as you're going out and conducting audits and you're seeing people moving their service ticketing and information out to the cloud and talking about moving applications or even potentially control and operations from the cloud from different asset owner. And as a cloud service provider, you're working with a variety of different sectors around the globe on unique operational and engineering risks and design criteria. What are your organizations doing to prepare people to understand this, speak that language? So you take a very difficult role of any cybersecurity professional in ICS and you say, welcome to the team. You need to understand IT, OT, cybersecurity, operations, engineering. We're trying to build pink polka dotted unicorns of difficult mixes of skill sets. And now you also need to understand cloud architecture and how that's going to work for our process and our environment, whether that's audit, whether it's an asset owner, or if it's a cloud service provider working across multiple sectors. What do you, how are you handling that challenge from workforce development? We'll start with you.
I can't really speak on it from a workforce development, but what I will say is what you just said was complicated.
I hear that a lot.
And that's truly what we're talking about when we're moving into the cloud. It's complicated and they're highly, we keep talking about cloud, but cloud and virtualization go hand in hand. It's very complicated, especially the benefits of using those technologies can be a cost benefit, an environmental benefit, but we're on the internet per se, right? And the internet was never designed to be safe using TCP/IP protocols. And all these years, right? All these years you've been using it. So that's the challenge is you said it best about knowing how to understand your tools, how to use it and configure it properly, right? I think a lot of times, especially when folks are kind of leveraging virtualization and cloud on the IT and OT side together, which we call kind of a mixed trust kind of scenario, and you don't understand the back end of all these things and the service accounts or the administration accounts or all the fact of where your data is actually going and what type of encryption method is being used and who manages the keys, whether you're talking about data or whether you're talking about real-time operations. From a regulatory perspective, what happens is we'll use ICS in the cloud, right? Since this is the panel, I'm going to I'm going to ramp up, ramp down generation from the cloud. So where is that being performed at? Well, it's in the cloud, on the internet, and someone at their home. Well, from a regulatory perspective, that's a control center, right? If it's 2 or more facilities. And so now the regulation is at your home, it's in the cloud. And so that is a difficult story, if you will, and also difficult from an evidentiary perspective to go, hey, we are compliant with the regulatory requirements while we're in the cloud, even though I have no control over it and it's my third party doing it for me, right? So I think that's where the standards in my world were kind of written from a physical architecture perspective. And so there are some changes coming, what we call BCSI in the cloud, best cyber system information in the cloud. So it's kind of a tiptoe into the cloud where you can put your data there, but it has to be secure, right? And that's encryption is what we're really talking about. And then virtualization, which lots of folks leverage that. I don't even know how old virtualization is at this point, 40 years, 35 years. I've lost count, but a lot of folks are leveraging those technologies. They have been for years. But again, when you add the cloud component to it and the data that goes back and forth and the fact, depending on which service you're using, right, whether it's platform as a service, software as a service, things just get a little bit difficult and it gets complicated. Thanks.
I think that's a fair point. It does get complicated.
It does get complicated. It doesn't have to be as complicated as it seems on the surface, though. So as a cloud service provider, what I would say is that every conversation with a customer, the foundational starting point is the shared responsibility model. So it is taking what you want to do in the cloud and then defining who is performing what role and in what capacity, and then what evidence supports. So how do you demonstrate that that control has been implemented? So that is the cornerstone to moving any workload, at least from an AWS perspective. From a helping our customers with training perspective, AWS has training for different tracks. So depending on what you're doing in the cloud, if you're managing, if you're operating, if you're building, we have a variety of training tracks. A lot of them are free, so they're available just online. But when we get down to specific use cases, like you mentioned BCSI, there's a lot you can do with BCSI in the cloud. We've taken the time, we've worked with a formal industry group to support the development of implementation guidance that's out for endorsement with NERC. We also have our own AWS compliance guide for BCSI that walks customers through the choices that they can make for who manages their keys, what type of encryption they're using, where their data is located. It walks them through that decision-making process so they can understand the security controls and figure out how to build it into their compliance program. And so we try to do that for every regulatory framework. That's why it's important for us to be engaged in these standards development processes, so that we understand the regulations, the challenges that our customers are facing, and then we can provide those resources to guide the training that they need.
And Tim, I totally ignored your workforce,
Uh-huh.
but I'll come back to that.
Sure.
And I did that on purpose because, she said it very well with the training aspects and all of that, is that, if you're looking at the number one risk out there, we keep talking about cyber, it's really workforce, and lack of workforce there and knowledge and skills. And I think we're at a point too, where I know I grew up in the cyber world in a different industry, and it was always taught to me you had to be a cyber person, you had to know this. And I think that where we're at today is if someone has the ability to learn and retain, anybody can do cyber.
Yep.
Anybody. And we talk IT and OT, the lines there are crossed so much, whether it's the cyber side or whether it's the electrical engineering side, you're going to come together at some point. If there's a cybersecurity incident, there's an event, there's a recovery situation, all hands on deck when it comes to those things. So really, folks that are in the operation sides are perfect for cyber. People that are on the cyber side are perfect for operations. So I think that even at your own organizations, really think outside of the box, be innovative on the types of folks that you're hiring and their ability to learn and to grow within your organization.
Yeah, and I think it's also really important to work together as a group, right? So obviously, as I mentioned, I have a lot of the IT and OT and cyber folks that report up into me, but we have other teams that are engineers, folks that are out iterating, trying to break things, come up with new solutions, as well as I have my sustaining engineering and my commissioning folks that are, in the day-to-day operations of these units. And when we first started having conversations about how we wanted to adopt cloud, I have one very particular engineer that's I absolutely love him, but his very first statement was no. And there was no questions. It was just, no, we're just not even going to have that conversation. And what ends up happening over time is you realize, well, first off, it's the first time he'd ever met me. So he didn't understand that I actually kind of somewhat knew what we were doing, which, is one of those things where you have to win people over. But what ends up happening is if you start bringing the right people in the right rooms and you have an open and honest conversation, you tear down barriers between the different teams, and you all realize that you're basically all working to earn the same paycheck in a company. And you're trying to figure out how to take that team and work and deliver a service. So that's the reason why, you have to find the right level of folks, the right people, and then you train all of them with the different aspects of what you're going to be utilizing. So learning about a platform and a tool is one aspect of it, but training somebody that has never seen the inside of a cloud console to understand what's there, but to get them comfortable with what's going on by explaining the process and the situation of how you take from A to B in a way that they understand is actually very important as well. You build that trust and you build teamwork, and that's how you cross-train different functional people. And you're 100% right. You have folks that come over from different groups that want to be living in the cyber world and vice versa. I've got folks that would much rather be commissioning generators because they enjoy it as much as they do. But it's all about community, and it's all about building that teamwork and trust in between the different groups, and really embracing it, because you can't make a decision in a silo. The second you start doing that, you end up with problems that lead to compromise, that lead to non-reliable sites, that lead to all of these things that we're trying to prevent.
That's great. I'm going to get you to start thinking of any questions that you'd like to ask. Are there any questions in Slack? Okay. Okay, I will navigate myself there. While I'm looking, are there any, so I would thank you for giving of your time and your talent to be here, but I also know that you're doing that every week and you're doing it in a number of different ways. For the people here and the people that are listening, are there any efforts that are underway that you believe in from the perspective of this is going to result in great things? All of us in our careers have gone off and been on working groups or been on advisory groups or been on, and you can tell pretty early this is going nowhere. And you start to withdraw a little bit because it's not going to, there's not going to be a caboose on that train. It's not going to end. There's no finish line. So for some of the things that you're pursuing and working on that you're choosing to contribute to and pursue, are the things you would recommend for people to get involved with and engage if this is a topic of interest to them? I'll start with you and you can work your way this way while I go look at Slack.
Yeah, good question. When it comes to cloud services, there's especially on the regulatory side, there's so much movement going on right now with it. And so if you're not familiar with NERC and NERC SIP, that's CIP, not SIP, which some of y'all are doing here today. I would get familiar with that in regards to the NERC SIP standards and that cloud services discussions are happening on different levels there. You can Google it, if you will, or use your AI technology to find it. But, you know, I'll kind of do a different direction. And if you're not connected to the different ISACs, some of you are y'all familiar with the ISACs? There's many different ones depending on which infrastructure you're in. But definitely want to put a shout out to, you know, the MS ISAC, the oil and gas LNG ISAC, and the EISAC, the electric ISAC, which is kind of where we're at. You know, I think right now, information sharing is so critical to our country and critical infrastructure. And that, again, a lot of this stuff is anonymous, but something that has occurred to you and your organization can benefit someone else, especially some of those attacks that you just talked about. And ransomware, malware attempts, those type of things. So I think getting connected into those organizations is very crucial. And I know we're talking about cloud, but you could be utilizing the cloud and there's something that has occurred there and you report it out and you could get help and also you could help others from that perspective. I think the other piece is a lot of people don't think about partnering with the government, the FBI, DHS and CISA, our partners at DOE. And the Public Utility Commission of Texas. There were several House and Senate bills that were passed on September 1st that impact those that are in Texas in regards to critical infrastructure as well, and that you should be aware of. So it's really a all hands on deck kind of approach. Your regulatory, what's out there on other industries, and your state and your government as well.
Yeah, you covered quite a few of the areas where I was actually going to talk, but that happens since we, you know, kind of work in the same space. I'd say that the one that also for me, I mean, EISAC is critical for what we do. Having an open forum to talk about what's going on, what threats are being seen in the environment, and what we can do to try to protect ourselves. That's a really great one. The other one that y'all host as well is a SIPWIG. So we actually have a working group where we work through the different standards of SIP. It's a very interesting conversation to have, especially with closed sessions where we can really work through what it is that, you know, we need to worry about, and especially in the ERCOT market, and as we try to, you know, comply with standards and process and risk mitigation. Outside of that, I think that really just continue to look in different areas and sometimes go find different sources of information where you wouldn't expect it. I think is also kind of a really good way to put that. I try to, off the top of my head, think of a really good community, but I can't think of it. So I'll just kind of pass it over, but that's.
Yeah, I would echo the comments about getting involved in NERC if that's something that either applies to you today, if those regulations, NERC SIP regulations are something that apply to you today, or you think they will in the future. There is a lot of work going on within the different committees and subcommittees. So the Reliability and Security Technical Committee, RSTC, and they have a subcommittee called CITES. They have a Security Security Integration and Technology Enablement Subcommittee. Testing my knowledge of acronyms. But they are the group that is looking at, what is the future of technology? How can we enable the industry to be able to adopt these new technologies? There's a white paper that is going around right now that is related to BezOps in the cloud. So if you're interested in that type of research, I would encourage you to go join those committees. At the same time, if you're just looking for what are other geos doing in this space, what other use cases make sense for you? I know the AWS Energy and Utilities page has a ton of use cases that are out there that talk about different operational use cases, things that our other customers are doing. I'm sure other cloud service providers have similar pages, and just put that out there. And then when we start talking about other groups and things to get involved with, there are lots of research organizations that we participate with as well, like EPRI, the DOE National Labs are some that we participate with. IEEE is a good one. There are a lot of research organizations that are out there looking at, what does the energy transition look like? How can cloud technology best support it? So, it's worth taking a look. It's worth doing a Google search and joining the committees where it makes sense.
Specifically for the national labs, if you are a asset owner, they are always looking for the research efforts to partner with
Yes.
someone in the industry.
Yep.
So if it's an area, don't just assume you have to go look at research they're doing. You can become part of the research that they're doing in many, many cases.
Yes.
Yeah.
Um,
Oak Ridge is really good about reaching out. We've had
For sure.
conversations.
Mhm.
For those in the room, I'll give you an opportunity for questions before we are completely out of time. There's a couple in the back. If you bring a microphone to them, and if you will wait until you have the microphone. Fire away.
I just was really wanting to know what were the electrical reasons Texas needed its own grid. So I don't know, cloud-based question. It's just been bothering me since you said it.
Electrical reasons, Texas has its own grid, so they are not part of the Eastern interconnection or the Western interconnection. Texas is in and of itself with DC ties to the other interconnections, meaning if a frequency excursion event and a collapse started to happen in one of those other interconnections, that would not flow into Texas. And if something horrible happened in Texas, it would not flow into the other interconnections. There is not a one grid across North America and the US. So when you hear a major publication say the grid is under attack, you should immediately understand that is not applicable.
That's the reason why when Uri happened, we didn't cause that many issues to our neighbors. It was
sure.
mainly self-inflicted.
Yes.
So you've all talked about your experience with the electrical grid, and I work for a major European ICS component vendor. And the Europeans kind of look at us sideways because in the US, we have 16 sectors of critical infrastructure, each with their own lead regulators. As you've had experience with NERC-CIP looking at cloud migrations and the regulatory impacts, are there any lessons learned that you'd like to share with other sectors as their regulators take up the same challenges?
Do you mean sharing amongst other regulators in the US? So the other critical infrastructure regulators in the US? Okay, so sorry, I just wanted to make sure that I understood the question. So the unique thing, to your point, in places like Europe, there is usually one regulation that applies, and it includes all of critical infrastructure, like the NIS directive, NIS2. In the US, you're right, we're very segmented and siloed. I think there is a lot of information sharing that already happens between sectors. And part of that is just the way that information sharing works with the government. But from a lessons learned in cloud implementations perspective, I think the collaborative nature of the NERC-CIP standards is one of the key benefits for the way that the regulatory construct works. And I would probably share that is a good approach for other aspects of energy and maybe other areas of critical infrastructure. But there are other sectors that are already using cloud for critical infrastructure approaches too. And so I think that information sharing should go both ways. I don't know if you have a different answer from the regulator's perspective.
No.
Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
No, but I think especially right now, because of the cold weather stuff that has happened with Uri and Elliott, there's obviously more connaissance in regards to oil, gas, and electric, right? So, and again, the regulatory, two different pieces there. oil and gas technically use under TSA with some of those requirements. But I think the partnerships there are inherently already happening, and there's communication, information sharing. I know that's something that we've done at our organization just because of how critical we are to each other, including technologies and physical security perspectives as well.
We've had an interesting time from way back where I commented on the urgent action of the electric sector in North America, for whatever reason, was progressing at a rate because we were a failure in our sector, moved at the speed of light and impacted and cascaded large areas. So we saw ourselves in the 16 sectors as the hub and spoke, meaning we're in the center. If we failed, everyone else, that all other sectors within kind of the first 72 are on new model, within 72 hours when diesel generation, local battery storage, whatever failed, all other sectors would feel pain if we weren't coming back online.
Yeah.
So a need for us to do better for the communities we serve, provide safe, reliable, affordable power for ourselves. Every utility worker is a customer. So it's a different model. We're not going to compete, we're mission focused. And we wanted to do better. So we pursued standards, we pursued regulations. Many of them are in version 8 or above, and it's been a long road. So we have tons of lessons learned on the regulatory side and cybersecurity approaches. This is one of the unique areas where, because that whole construct has been built, we're slow to adopt this new technology. So now you can go to other sectors and other parts of the world, and we can learn from them from a technical perspective. And then we will move into regulation, and then they can learn from us from a regulatory construct and how to build and how to audit and how to assess. So we are definitely kind of, everyone needs to work together. This is a team sport model to get it right for sure. I think that is the close of our panel. For the questions that are online in Slack, we can respond to you via text and just key in our answers. For those that are here that aren't looking online in general, the questions I would sum up of who is ultimately responsible. If from the security, from the defense, from the reliability, from an audit perspective, it needs to be shared accountability models. And how does that work within a cloud service provider and an entity or an asset owner organization? There is one question that I would say is outside of that, and it has to do with doing vulnerability assessments in an industrial control system that has cloud integration. So I will defer that question to when Mr. Don Weber is talking. But the other questions we will respond to online. I would like to thank our panelists, and if you'll please join me in doing so. Thank you for coming.